Introducing the MacroCube. Hi and welcome back to the shed. I'm Joe Bleeps and today I wanted to show you my latest project, which is a new Gameboy Macro modelled after the style of the original GameCube. So I'm calling it the MacroCube. I know, I couldn't think of anything better. Anyway, there's a lot about this which is daft, but there's a lot that's quite practical as well. Also, this is something that makes use of what is arguably the most useless feature of the original GameCube, but there's a certain charm to it, and I'll talk to you a little bit about my reasons why I've done it in the video, and also if you didn't know what a Gameboy Macro was before seeing this video, I'll give you a little bit of a backstory about those too. So keep watching and see what you think. Alright, so this is my MacroCube. It's a custom Gameboy Macro, the bottom half of a Nintendo DS Lite that's used primarily for playing Game Boy Advance games. There's lots of different ways of making these, and this is my latest one, which involves this little nod to the original GameCube design, but it does have some practical features as well. So I'm going to talk to you about that in the video, but first let's get a bit of background information about Gameboy Macros. So the original Nintendo DS was the first radical departure from the line of Game Boy consoles such as the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Pocket and so on. This was the first handheld that Nintendo brought out after that didn't have the Game Boy moniker. This was a new format, the DS, for dual screen because it had two screens, and it was a radical new idea. And I think to try and keep the original Game Boy crowd, there was also a slot for Game Boy Advance cartridges, so you could use the lower half to play Game Boy Advance games as well as using the console and the slot on top for playing Nintendo DS games. So it's got that Game Boy Advance functionality. Also, the hinge was fairly delicate, fairly easily broken. Someone came up with the bright idea of removing the top screen, tricking the console into thinking that top screen was still there and making it into something I've got here, which was called a Game Boy Macro, and it's had all of the hinge parts removed, smoothed out. There's a resistor in there to trick it into thinking the top screen's still there. The speaker that was originally on top has been repositioned in this area here, and this is one of the first ones that I built. It's kind of cool. It works. You can play Game Boy Advance games on it. The screen was the letdown really with the original Nintendo DS console, but it was massively improved upon with DS Lite. Now, it's no news to anybody that the original Nintendo Game Boy is like my favourite thing in the world ever, but a large part of that is the nostalgia that throws back to when I first had one of those. It's also a very strong opinion of mine that the Nintendo DS Lite is one of the most magnificent handheld console designs of all time. I think it was massively ahead of its time. The shape, the look of it, the practicality, the quality of the screens. I mean, it was just an amazing console. And one of the things that I think is really so important to say when I'm talking about making these Game Boy Macros is if you've got a Nintendo DS or a Nintendo DS Lite that works, then don't damage it, don't separate it. There is no point. This is a magnificent console. It still has that Game Boy Advance functionality. It still does all the things that a macro will do. A Game Boy Macro is a means of being able to take something that's been damaged and abandoned and give it a new lease of life. So if you've got one of these where the hinge is broken, or if you've got one of these where the top screen is damaged or no longer works, then this is a perfect candidate for making a Game Boy Macro. But if you've got something like this where it works and both screens are fine, then please, I really would urge you, keep it stock, keep it original. It's perfect. It is handheld perfection. It's even got this sleep mode when you close it. Like, you know, okay, so this is not a video all about what's great about the DS Lite. Again, delicate hinges, delicate screens, the top screen can often get damaged, and there are things that you can do to create something new and exciting with the leftover parts. This is a way of being able to take the lower part of the Nintendo DS Lite and retain as many of these original features as possible. A lot of the approaches to making the Game Boy Macros originally involved this sort of method of cutting away all the hinge parts and smoothing them all off to make it look like a purpose-built console. But I always found it had that kind of DIY look to it. It looked like I'd sanded it and filled it and painted it. It didn't look like something that had been bought in that state. So the issue I always had when it came to making Game Boy Macros with the DS Lite is that it didn't lend itself quite as well to removing the hinge parts and smoothing out the surface as the original DS did. The original DS, it was fairly easy to shape and fill and get a decent finish, but because of this sort of perfect crisp edge that you've got all the way around here and the curved edge on the screen, there was a lot of careful work involved with trying to smooth all that out, and I never really had the patience for it. I did try building a few, but I didn't like the process of having to do all the filling and sanding and painting and filling and sanding and painting, and I was just too impatient. I wanted an easier version. version, and that led me to a project called the Neon Advance, which you may have heard of before. It got me my sort of 15 minutes of fame a few years ago, and it involves suspending an acrylic rod between these 2 points, and I worked out a way of wiring up an LED to carefully diffuse the light across that whole surface there without providing too much glare when you're trying to play the game. And I made loads of these and I had a really good run, and it was a lot of fun, and then I got dragged away to other projects, but I'm still hoping to make more of these in future. And if there is interest, I will make a video or series of videos about building these too, because I think it's a long time since I made them and I've missed them, and I think they're cool. But the downside of the Neon Advance was they were hugely labor intensive. They took me a lot of time to wire everything up inside, to get this and calibrate it just right so it didn't produce that sort of level of glare, and so it looked as professional as possible. So I was still on a mission to find an easier way of doing this, something that other people could have a go at as well very easily, and I think I've figured it out. So enter the MacroCube. So the idea with this is that it covers a multitude of sins. It looks kind of fun, and it's kind of practical and easy to use. So the whole process of making the Gameboy Macro uses all the original stock parts with no cutting and sanding at all. So let's talk about this handle. Okay, so I've designed it and shaped it so that the shape of the hinges is sort of continued along here like this into one continuous shape, and along here too, and then it links in with the handle. Now, a few of the things I had to try and prioritize was, first of all, making sure that there was still access to the charging port and the cartridge socket on the back, that the handle didn't obscure any of that. I didn't want the handle sticking up too much, and I wanted the cover over the slot where the original ribbon was for the top. I also wanted it as easy as possible to fit, so although it's a nice sturdy join there and that's not going anywhere, it's designed and shaped so it slots exactly into the hinges. Let me just put it down and carefully try and remove the handle. So it's 3D printed, so it is flexible, and I designed the model so that the shape of the ends of the handle is exactly modelled on the shape of the internal openings on the hinge, which is different on either side, so we've got different bits on each end. With that handle removed, like this would be your most basic Gameboy Macro that you could make, which plays well but looks a bit weird with these leftover bits of hinge. And also you've got the slot from where the ribbon for the top screen originally was directed, and we wanted to cover that up. When I did that on the Neon Advance, I used to have to fill that and paint it and smooth it over. With this one, you don't even have to bother with that. All you do is you 3D print the piece, and I will link the file for the model I did for the people who want to tinker about with that and come up with their own versions. That would be cool to see, but for now, this is how it works. You don't even have to do it when it's all in bits. You can build the whole macro and then take the handle. It simply slots in to the hinge at one end, and then because the plastic, the 3D printed PLA, is flexible, you just push that in position and it will click and lock in place, and then that's secured. That is it. You can do it in different colors. I've got a purple one there as well. So although there's loads of different color combinations that you could go for in terms of the handle, the buttons, the shell and so on, I wanted to try and make this one as much of a tribute as possible to the original GameCube. And as there are no original purple Nintendo DS Lite, the black version was the best one to go for. Although I might be tempted to paint and make a purple one in future, it kind of goes against my original idea of making it quick and easy. So this is all original parts. The grey buttons come from a silver Nintendo DS Lite. All the other parts are straight from the same black Nintendo DS Lite console. The handle, of course, I've printed with black PLA. So it is pretty simple and straightforward. One thing I want to mention is that the cartridge I've got in here is an Easy Flash Omega. Now, the advantage of these is that they are a lot smaller than the original Nintendo Game Boy Advance games. So if I wanted to play my Game Boy Advance Street Fighter cartridge in here, it would stick out of the console a little bit like that, which is no biggie, that's fine. And the other thing that's an advantage of the original DS is it's a bit bigger, a bit chunkier, and the cartridges fit flush in there. So you can use the standard size cartridges in there, but because they stick out, the Easy Flash Omega comes with a smaller shell, which will actually fit a little more flush in the console, which is kind of cool. Also, I have an R4 cartridge. Now, a lot of people I've seen in the past who've made these consoles have removed the original DS slot to position a speaker. I don't really like that because I don't like removing quite handy functionality. So what I've done with the speaker is I've fitted it here. I took out the slot for the stylus and replaced it with the speaker there. So the sound comes out here. It's not perfect, but it's good enough, and the cartridge slot is still functional. Now you can use that for DS games, I guess, but you'd only be able to see one screen. But what you can do with it is you can use various different emulators. So in here, I've got an emulator that is used for Game Boy games. So I can load up a list of Game Boy games, choose different ones there. So we'll have Amazing Spider-Man 2, and that will load up and you can play it just like you would on a Nintendo Game Boy. That's kind of cool. As it stands, this particular one that I've built, everything's perfect on here, but the A button isn't very responsive. And so I'm going to have to take it apart, which means you lucky people can get to have a little peep inside this thing that I have made. So let's open it up and take a look. Okay, so to open this thing up, what you're going to need is a small crosshead screwdriver, a small tri-wing screwdriver, and also maybe a knife to remove these two little rubber feet. To separate the two parts of the shell, a spudger is perfect. Right, so once you've got the screws out, you just lift away the back from the front at the shoulder button, put the spudger in the gap, run it around the edge, and you should feel a few little pops as the bits come apart, and then you can just lift off the back of the shell and put it somewhere safe. And then we can see inside where I've positioned the speaker. So I've simply glued it in position there. I find the best place to do it is so that you can just get the screw in place there, and that this top edge of the speaker lines up just with the line. There's like a line on the motherboard that kind of goes across, and then there's a slight angle. If you get the speaker just below that, it's in about the right place to be positioned perfectly for the opening. In terms of wiring, the negative one is just down to the ground point on the Game Boy Advance slot, and the positive is fed up through underneath the DS slot, and then it goes along, and I've filed out a little bit of the motherboard to loop it around the other side. I'll show you the other side in a moment. To get all that to fit in place, not only have I removed the slot for the stylus, but I've also used a Dremel to remove a few little bits of plastic. Now this is not intended as a tutorial video. If there is a demand for that, if people want to see more of this and see how to do it in more broken down steps, then I'm quite keen to do another one of those. I think there's a lot of Game Boy Macro tutorials out there, so whether we need another one, I don't know. But if you are interested in building your own one of these, I'll do an entire video that guides you through that process. So if I carefully push on the screen from the other side, I'll be able to lift out the insides and you can see what we've got. So I've got my front shell there, and here is my front motherboard. Now the key bit here is over in this area. Okay, so the speaker solder points are SPL0 and SPR0. So L0 left, R0 right. You don't need me to explain that to you. So these 2 points where you connect the resistor, which is a 330 ohm surface mounted resistor, is LED A2 and LED C2. I think they're labeled just underneath where the screen is there. The screen is connected here for the actual visual output, and there's also another small connector here which is for the touchscreen. The touchscreen's optional. You can keep the touchscreen functionality, or if you want a nice clean new screen, you can actually peel off that layer and ditch that bit altogether if you're just planning to use it as a Game Boy Advance. Now the problem I was having was with my A and B buttons. Now you see this bit here, there's a component removed. That is a means of being able to deal with disabling sleep mode, and I've made a separate video for that because it's quite an involved little process, and I thought it would make for a more interesting video that people could find to solve that particular problem. So I'll try and remember to link that video up here when I've finished this one. But for now, I'm just going to clean up these 4 points so that my A and B buttons function a little bit better than they do at the moment. And I can see, inspecting that, there's a little bit of dirt and corrosion on that point, which is an easy fix. All I need is a cotton bud and some rubbing alcohol, and I'll just rub those on the surface so it comes up nice and clean. While I'm at it, I may as well do it for all of my contacts on my D-pad. You don't need to do it for start and select because they're little clicky tactile buttons. Just give that a final little polish before we put it back together again. And the reassembly process, once you've got your buttons and everything in position, you lift the frame, hold it carefully, poke your finger through to catch the screen, get the screen lined up in place, and everything should just sort of drop in. You've got to be kind of careful not to catch anything, and that's why I've done things like this where I've used a round needle file to scoop out a little bit of the PCB so that nothing gets trapped and wires can be routed safely. Once these are in position, I'm ready to put 2 screws in, here and here. These are crosshead ones. By the way, I put the speaker in place with hot glue. I found found that to be the best thing because it's got a good bit of structural stability, but also it will insulate against the electronic components, so you're not likely to get any short circuits or anything like that. So you've just got two very tiny crosshead screws to pop these in place. Once those are locked in position, then you're safe to get your shoulder buttons in. Now the shoulder buttons are a little bit tricky because they've got a spring and a pin in place, but I've had plenty of experience of getting those in position, so famous last words. We'll need a pair of tweezers to help with that, to bring the spring around and get it in position. It can occasionally ping back and catch you on the fingers. Again, bit of practice goes a long way, so we'll get that one in as well. So what do you think? Do you think a tutorial video for this sort of thing would be worth me adding to my channel? So that's in place there. Now I can get my back shell. Watch out for your power switch and in particular your volume, because if you forget and you don't get it lined up with these tiny little buttons and they snap off, then that can be very awkward. So I will set that so that the volume is at minimum. Set the volume at minimum there. The power button further down so it's in the off position, and then if you just get it in position there, start from the bottom, lay it over, and then just click everything together, particularly along this row here where that'll like bump up. If you just clip that over there, it's clicked ready in position and ready for you to put your screws in. Now watch out for this, because bizarrely and annoyingly, if you've ever tried modding a Nintendo DS Lite before, that screw and that screw are long, that one is short, and if you get them mixed up and you put the long screw in there, you will punch a hole through the front of your brand new Nintendo DS or your brand new Gameboy Macro, and you'll be very upset, and there is nothing you can do about it. So do watch out for that. Make sure that on this upper right hole you do not put the longer screw, you just put the little tiny short one in. Don't say I didn't warn you. I've made that mistake too many times before. So there's the 3 with the tri-wing screw and the tiny little black one in the cartridge slot there as well. And then you've also got a few Phillips screw ones, the 2 little gold ones, go underneath where the feet are on the back there. So I can put the little rubber feet back over. They tend to keep their stickiness. They're quite easy to reposition without needing any glue or anything like that. And then you've also got this tiny little short crosshead one, which goes in this other corner here and doesn't punch a hole through on the front. So if you've done that, yeah, you end up with a horrible looking hole here that you can't really do anything about, and you have to abandon the project altogether and start again another day if you're like me, or it won't bother you at all and it's fine. I wish I was more like that. Anyway, let's get my battery back in place and put the battery cover on, fasten up the screw, just double check that the volume control's okay, everything's all right there, and then we'll put our handle in. Now the bit at this end is a little bit longer than the bit at the other end. So if we start by pushing the long one in place, you just push it flat and into place. And then the other end, just a careful bit of flexing and then let that pop in the other way. And there we go, we are done. And if I switch that on, we'll get a game in there. So let's go. I often go with Street Fighter just as a test one to make sure that my shoulder buttons work and that my sound works and that all the rest of it goes. So there you go, we've got the sound. So that's out my little speaker on the back there. And it's quite good. Let's just clean that screen up a little bit. It's a bit fingerprinty from all that handle in there. I'll just turn off the sound for now. It's responding really well to my A button now, just from cleaning up that surface. And then when you're playing a game and it starts, you can just test out all of your buttons. I always put it on sort of training mode, so I can just at my leisure move forwards, back, down, up, A, B, shoulder button, select, and start. Everything is working fine. So that's it, the MacroCube, and it's just a simple clip-in 3D printed piece which makes the job of building these Game Boy Macros so much easier. I don't think the aesthetic's for everyone, but I quite like it. I think it's quite charming, and it manages to hide all of the exposed bits left behind after removing the hinge and leaves it with something that's got a bit of character, and also it links to a little bit of Nintendo heritage. So I'm pretty proud of this one. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you think I'm stupid, tell me something I don't already know. And if you like it, I'm stoked. So do let me know. I am going to be sharing the file. I'll try and remember to link it in the description. So if you want to make one yourself, tag me when you're finished. I'd be intrigued to see what sort of things people come up with on those. So until next time, bye.